Who raised you more? Your parents, your grandparents, or someone else?
Imagine coming home after 12 hours of spreadsheets and coffee runs, only to find your safe haven ransacked by the people who raised you, all for a brother who couldn't be bothered to visit in years, your kids sobbing amid the chaos, and in that gut-wrenching moment, you whisper words that shatter everything they thought they knew about family. I never pictured my life turning into one of those cautionary tales you hear at book club gatherings where women in their 40s swap stories about meddling in-laws over glasses of cheap Merlot. The kind that starts with a simple boundary crossed and spirals into questions about loyalty that keep you up at night staring at the ceiling fan's lazy spin. But there I was on a crisp autumn afternoon in suburban Columbus, Ohio, pulling my reliable old Honda Accord into the driveway of the modest three-bedroom ranch house I'd managed to afford on my salary as an office manager at the local insurance firm, my shoulders aching from hunching over a computer screen all day while fielding calls from frustrated policyholders who treated me like the bearer of all bad news. And as I killed the engine with a sigh that carried the weight of another overtime shift unpaid, the familiar outline of my home against the fading sunlight seemed unchanged at first glance, yet something in the air felt off, a subtle shift like the way the neighborhood quieted before a summer storm rolls in from Lake Erie. Grabbing my worn leather purse from the passenger seat where I'd tossed it during the commute clogged with rush-hour traffic on I-270, I stepped out onto the cracked concrete path lined with overgrown hostas that I'd meant to trim last weekend, but never found the time amid soccer practices and school projects. The scent of fallen leaves mingling with an unfamiliar tang of fresh paint that wafted from the open front door, making my steps quicken as I pushed inside, calling out for Emily and Jack, in that automatic mom voice honed from years of balancing single parenthood, since my divorce from Tom 3 years earlier left me navigating custody and carpool solo. The living room came into view cluttered with cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly near the couch, their labels scrawled in my dad's blocky handwriting proclaiming contents like Mike's linens and guest towels. And there amid the disarray stood my 8-year-old daughter Emily, her small frame shaking with quiet sobs as she clutched her well-loved stuffed elephant whose ears had frayed from countless bedtime hugs, while 10-year-old Jack lingered in the doorway to the hallway, his baseball glove forgotten in his grip as if he'd been caught mid-practice swing, their faces pale and streaked with confusion that twisted my stomach into knots tighter than the ones I tied in my running shoes for morning jogs around the block. My parents, Mom and Dad, bustled about with the efficiency of retirees who'd turned homemaking into a full-time crusade since Dad's retirement from the auto plant 2 years back, Mom arranging throw pillows on the sofa with her usual flourish, while Dad hefted a suitcase toward the stairs. But when they spotted me in the threshold, Mom's smile froze into something brittle like the crust on her over-baked apple pie. And Dad cleared his throat in that gruff way he did when caught red-handed after sneaking cookies from the jar. What on earth had transpired in this house while I clocked hours under harsh fluorescent lights dodging passive-aggressive emails from my boss? I wondered as Emily rushed to wrap her arms around my waist, her voice muffled against my work blouse as she explained through hiccups how Grandma and Grandpa had arrived that morning unannounced with toolboxes and shopping bags, declaring it high time to transform the kids' bedrooms into a proper guest suite for Uncle Mike's family, who were fleeing a basement flood up in Pittsburgh, complete with new queen-sized beds squeezed into spaces meant for twin mattresses, fresh coats of neutral paint erasing the vibrant murals Jack and I had painted together last spring, and even a small coffee station installed on the dresser that once overflowed with Emily's collection of colorful hair clips and drawings from art class. Kneeling to meet her eyes, I smoothed back her tangled curls that desperately needed washing after a day of playground adventures, feeling that primal surge of protectiveness rise like bile mixed with the resolve I'd built from scraping by on child support checks that arrived late more often than not. And as I glanced toward the now alien doorways of their rooms, I saw the remnants of their world scattered like casualties, Jack's model airplanes relegated to a dusty corner of the garage where humidity could warp their delicate wings, Emily's bookshelf emptied of chapter books we'd read aloud on rainy evenings, replaced by neatly folded linens that smelled of store-bought starch rather than the comforting chaos of childhood. Dad launched into His justification without pause, explaining how Mike's wife Tara was expecting their third child any day now and their rental had water damage from a burst pipe that insurance wouldn't cover fully, framing it as a temporary favor for family in need. The same line he'd used years ago to bail Mike out of credit card debt from one of his failed business ventures, while Mom nodded vigorously, adding that blood ties demanded such sacrifices, especially in tough economic times when everyone from factory workers to office admins like me felt the pinch of rising grocery bills and gas prices hovering around $3 a gallon. Jack piped up then, his voice cracking with the injustice of it all, pointing out how they'd even unplugged his gaming console from the shared family room to make space for extra cribs, the device now tangled in extension cords behind the TV stand. And in that instant, witnessing their hurt transform from bewilderment to a deep-seated sense of displacement, I felt a quiet fury settle over me. Not the explosive kind that leads to shouting matches at holiday dinners, but the steady burn of a woman who's learned to channel disappointment into action after too many instances of being overlooked in favor of the charming, but unreliable brother who always landed on his feet. "Get your things," I said softly, my tone even and unyielding as the steel resolve I'd forged during late-night budgeting sessions to cover braces for Emily and summer camp fees for Jack. Watching as they exchanged puzzled glances before nodding and hurrying to collect what toys and clothes remained accessible, oblivious to the gravity of those words marking the end of the unassuming sanctuary we'd cultivated through bedtime routines and weekend pancakes, the final chapter in a home that had weathered Tom's departure and my promotions earned through sheer grit. As they stuffed backpacks with favorite stuffed animals and a few cherished books, I turned to my parents with measured calm, inquiring just how long they'd orchestrated this overhaul without a courtesy call or text, my mind flashing to the family dynamics that had always tilted toward Mike, the golden child who got the new bike for his 16th birthday while I mended my hand-me-downs, the one whose college tuition Dad footed despite my scholarships paying my own way through community college nights after high school shifts at the diner. Dad shrugged it off as a spur-of-the-moment decision, no more than 2 weeks of inconvenience, but Mom's fidgeting with her apron strings betrayed a deeper undercurrent, a favoritism rooted in unspoken histories that made my blood run colder than a January wind whipping through the cornfields outside town. We loaded the car methodically, the trunk swallowing sleeping bags and the forgotten frozen lasagna I'd planned to heat for dinner now destined for Lisa's microwave across town where my sister had offered her guest room as a temporary haven. And as we backed out of the driveway, I caught sight of Mike's oversized SUV rounding the corner, his family tumbling out with luggage and laughter that grated against the raw wound in my chest, utterly unaware of the rift their arrival had deepened into a chasm. Driving away under the streetlights flickering on early due to the shortening days, the kids' questions about where we were going filling the cabin with innocent curiosity, I gripped the wheel tighter, sensing this was merely the opening salvo in a confrontation that would peel back layers of resentment built over decades. But the true intrigue ignited later that evening at Lisa's cozy split level where we unpacked amid her collection of therapy books and essential oils, when Emily unearthed an old photo album slipped accidentally into her bag by Grandpa, its pages yellowed with images of young Mike posing beside an envelope marked Trust Fund Starter, a subtle clue to the financial favoritism that had always simmered beneath our family's surface, leaving me to ponder in the dim lamplight just how far those imbalances extended and what revelations awaited if I dared to pull the thread. Arriving at my sister Lisa's place after that drive through the twilight streets of Columbus felt like stepping into a temporary refuge amid the storm brewing in my chest. Her welcoming hug at the door carrying the faint aroma of her signature chili bubbling on the stove that she'd whipped up knowing we'd need comfort food after the upheaval, and as we unloaded the kids' backpacks from the trunk under the glow of her porch light, Emily and Jack's chatter about the adventure of sleeping over at Aunt Lisa's masking their underlying confusion about why Grandma and Grandpa had appended their world so casually. I forced a smile while inwardly mapping out how to address this invasion without exploding into the kind of family feud that leaves scars deeper than the ones from our parents' divorce when Mike and I were kids. "Lisa, with her calm demeanor honed from years counseling at the community center, where she helped folks untangle emotional knots much like the one tightening around my throat. Suggested we crash there indefinitely until I sorted things out, her spare room already set up with air mattresses and fresh sheets that smelled of laundry detergent rather than the upheaval back home, and over bowls of steaming chili laced with chunks of ground beef and kidney beans that warmed me from the inside out. We debriefed while the kids dove into a puzzle on the coffee table, their small hands piecing together a picture of a serene beach scene that contrasted sharply with the chaos. We'd fled. By the next morning, after a fitful night where dreams of stripped rooms morphed into arguments echoing through empty hallways, I woke to the scent of coffee brewing in Lisa's kitchen and the sound of Jack practicing his multiplication tables with her over breakfast cereal, determination settling in like the frost on the windows as I decided to confront Mom and Dad head-on. Not with screams that would give them ammunition to paint me as the hysterical one, but with the measured persistence I'd learned negotiating raises at the office, where every word counted toward proving my value. Mom texted mid-morning insisting on a family dinner that evening at their colonial house on the outskirts of town, framing it as an olive branch to discuss logistics and smooth ruffled feathers, though I detected the undercurrent of control in her words. The same tactic she'd used when Mike skipped school to chase some half-baked dream, and she covered for him with the principle, always prioritizing harmony over accountability, and after coordinating with my boss for an early out from the insurance firm where spreadsheets waited like unanswered prayers, I spent the afternoon at Lisa's helping the kids unpack their essentials into drawers, injecting humor into the moment by joking about turning the room into a fort against unwanted guests, their giggles easing the knot in my gut as Emily arranged her stuffed animals in a protective circle around the bed. Pulling up to my parents' driveway that evening, the house aglow with string lights Mom had strung for no particular reason other than to make gatherings feel festive, I steeled myself with a deep breath of the crisp air carrying hints of wood smoke from neighboring chimneys. Stepping inside to the familiar clutter of knickknacks on shelves collected from garage sales and vacations we'd taken when gas was cheap and family road trips meant sing-alongs rather than silent resentments, where the dining table already groaned under a spread of pot roast slow-cooked to tenderness with carrots and potatoes swimming in gravy, mashed spuds whipped fluffy with butter, and green beans snapped fresh from Dad's garden out back, all prepared in that Midwestern tradition of feeding problems away as if calories could mend emotional rifts. Mike and Tara had arrived earlier than expected, their SUV dominating the curb like an uninvited elephant, and as I entered the kitchen, Tara bounced their rambunctious toddler on her hip. While nursing a glass of iced tea, her exhaustion evident in the shadows under her eyes from late nights, with the impending third child making her waddle slightly. And Mike lounged against the counter cracking jokes about how the new guest suite back at my place was a step up from their flooded Pittsburgh rental where water had seeped through walls like a bad metaphor for their leaky finances. Mom fluttered about passing rolls from a basket lined with checkered cloth, her smile overly bright to compensate for the tension humming like a faulty appliance, while Dad nursed a bottle of beer from the six-pack he'd picked up at the corner store. Avoiding my gaze as he muttered greetings, and Lisa arrived fashionably late with a bottle of wine to diffuse the air, her presence a quiet ally in the room thick with unspoken accusations. Conversation meandered safely at first through topics like the upcoming Cleveland Browns game, where fans clung to hope despite another losing season, and the rising cost of everything from milk at $2 a quart to college tuition that loomed over Jack's future like a distant thundercloud. But as we settled into plates piled high, I waited for the natural lull when forks scraped against china and seconds were debated, seizing the moment to voice my concerns with a light touch of humor that masked the steel beneath, commenting on how thoughtful it was for them to redecorate my home without consulting the deed holder, my words landing with enough wit to draw an uncomfortable chuckle from Tara while Mike shifted in his chair like he'd sat on a tack. The atmosphere thickened faster than Mom's gravy, Dad defending their actions with anecdotes of Mike's recent hardships from his sales job derailed by supply chain snarls post-pandemic, painting him as the perpetual underdog deserving of a break, and Mom layering on about family obligations transcending property lines, especially when blood ran thicker than any mortgage payment I'd juggled. Alone since Tom's alimony dried up amid his new life in Cincinnati. I parried gently but firmly, highlighting with a wry smile how if unity meant so much, perhaps a heads-up before evicting children from their beds might have preserved it, the subtext exposing their oversight in a way that had Lisa nodding subtly across the table, her eyes twinkling with suppressed amusement at the unraveling dynamic. Mike bristled at the implication, countering that I was wound too tight after the divorce turned me into a control freak, as if raising 2 kids on a single income while climbing from receptionist to manager made me the unreasonable party. And Tara attempted to mediate by proposing everyone pitch in for a storage unit to house the kids' displaced belongings, her suggestion falling flat as I dismissed it politely, asserting I'd manage my household's needs without further intrusion, the dismissal carrying the weight of years overlooked in favor of his charm. As dessert plates of Mom's pecan pie circled, my revenge unfolded seamlessly when I pulled out my phone under the guise of checking a message, sharing a group photo I'd snapped earlier of the before and after rooms, vibrant kids' chaos versus sterile guest blandness, captioned with a quip about in-law interior design surprises that I'd already disseminated to our extended family text chain, notifications buzzing immediately with reactions from aunts and uncles ranging from shocked exclamations to probing questions that transformed their private maneuver into a communal spectacle, Mike's face flushing a shade deeper than the autumn leaves outside, while Mom's composure cracked just enough to reveal the panic of exposure. Laughter bubbled awkwardly to cover the discomfort, Dad grumbling about overreactions while Tara eyed Mike sideways, but the evening concluded with stiff hugs at the door that felt as obligatory as returning Tupperware at reunions. And as I drove back to Lisa's with the kids recounting the pie's sweetness in the back seat, a small sense of triumph warmed me against the chill of the night, replaying how I'd turned their power play into my narrative without escalating to shouts. Yet that fleeting victory soured later when, after tucking the kids into bed with stories of brave explorers reclaiming lost treasures, I slipped into the kitchen for a glass of water and overheard Dad on the cordless phone in the adjoining room during a quick detour to grab leftovers from the fridge, his voice hushed and urgent as he discussed wiring $5,000 to Mike's account for an unspecified emergency, the figure and familiarity of the transaction unveiling a layer of financial favoritism that made me freeze in the shadows, heart pounding with the realization that this room takeover was merely the tip of a submerged iceberg threatening to capsize the fragile balance I'd maintained for so long. That overheard conversation on the phone lingered in my mind like a bad aftertaste from one of Mom's experimental casseroles that mixed too many canned soups into a murky mess, pulling me from a shallow sleep on Lisa's couch where the springs poked through the cushions, reminding me this displacement was no temporary glitch, but a symptom of deeper fractures in the family foundation I'd assumed was solid after years of dutiful visits and holiday cards exchanged with feigned enthusiasm. So by the time dawn filtered through the curtains, casting a pale glow over the kids' sleeping forms curled under quilts borrowed from Lisa's linen closet, I rose with a resolve sharper than the edge of a fresh memo from work, determined to unearth the truths buried under layers of favoritism that had always cast Mike in the role of cherished heir while I played the reliable workhorse pulling the load without fanfare. After dropping Emily and Jack at school with their backpacks heavier than usual from overnight editions like favorite pajamas and a deck of cards for downtime, the bus route winding through neighborhoods where minivans lined driveways and kids in hoodies dashed across lawns, I headed straight to Mom and Dad's house using the spare key they'd given me back when Tom first started staying out late and I needed a bolt hole for the kids during those uncertain nights. Slipping into the back door past the kitchen where Dad's coffee pot still gurgled from his early riser habit, the air thick with the aroma of Folgers and yesterday's bacon grease that clung to everything like unspoken regrets. Climbing the creaky stairs to the attic access through a pull-down ladder that dusted my slacks with insulation particles floating like forgotten confetti from some long-ago celebration, I pushed aside boxes marked with dates from my childhood spanning the 80s when leg warmers and mixtapes defined teenage rebellion, the dim bulb overhead swinging slightly to illuminate stacks of Photo albums, tax returns yellowed at the edges, and ledgers Dad kept in notebooks with his meticulous handwriting tracking household expenses from the days when a gallon of gas cost under $1 and family vacations meant tent camping in the Hocking Hills rather than the cruise Mike had sweet-talked them into funding for his honeymoon. Sifting through the detritus of decades, patterns emerged with a clarity that hit harder than the unexpected overtime I'd pulled last week to cover a coworker's vacation, revealing not just the occasional bailout for Mike's scrapes like the time he totaled Dad's truck joyriding at 17, but a systematic funneling of resources, bank statements tucked into envelopes labeled loans to Michael, showing transfers totaling over $30,000 in the last 10 years alone, amounts that dwarfed the modest inheritance I'd received from Grandma Jenkins, which barely covered the down payment on my house after fees and taxes ate into it, each entry justified with notes about Mike's entrepreneurial risks in ventures that fizzled faster than a sparkler on the 4th of July, while my steady climb at the insurance firm went uncelebrated beyond a pat on the back and a gift card to Olive Garden. A wry chuckle escaped me amid the dust as I flipped to a snapshot of teen Mike grinning beside a brand-new pickup truck gleaming under showroom lights. The one Dad had financed on credit after denying my plea for help with car repairs when mine broke down during a blizzard, the irony twisting like the vines overtaking the backyard fence. But the amusement soured quickly upon discovering forged signatures on documents where Mom had co-signed for Mike's business loans without telling me, potentially jeopardizing their own retirement nest egg built from Dad's pension checks that arrived like clockwork every month. By midday, with the attic light fading as clouds rolled in threatening rain that pattered against the roof like impatient fingers, I gathered the most damning papers into a folder, my hands steady despite the tremor of betrayal coursing through me, and descended to confront them in the kitchen where Mom was elbow-deep in pie crust for her legendary apple filling spiced with cinnamon and nutmeg that usually signaled comfort, but now felt like a veil over deceptions. Dad walked in from the garage wiping grease from his palms after tinkering with an old lawnmower, his face hardening at the sight of the folder spread on the oak table scarred from years of family meals. And as I laid out the evidence with the precision of a presentation to my boss on quarterly metrics, explaining how this chronic favoritism had not only skewed opportunities, but forced me to bootstrap every milestone from Emily's dance classes to Jack's braces without the safety net they'd extended to Mike time and again, Mom's rolling pin stilled, her eyes welling with a mix of defensiveness and dawning shame while Dad blustered about tough love versus enabling, claiming Mike's rough patches stemmed from the family split when they divorced briefly in the 90s, leaving him shuttling between homes while I stayed put with Lisa. The emotional showdown intensified when the kids arrived home early from school due to a half-day for teacher conferences, bursting through the door with backpacks thudding and tales of a science fair project involving baking soda volcanoes that mirrored the eruption building in the room, prompting me to shield them by suggesting an impromptu picnic in the yard while I pressed further. Mom finally cracking under the weight to admit the bias rooted in guilt over Mike's childhood instability. After Dad's affair surfaced during that turbulent period, a revelation that reframed my memories of holidays strained by whispers and slammed doors, making me question if my steadiness had been punishment rather than virtue. Protecting the kids fiercely, I cut the discussion short with a firm boundary about no further contact until repayments began, herding Emily and Jack out to the grass where they spread a blanket amid dandelions gone to seed, their laughter over picnic sandwiches a fragile armor against the turmoil. But before leaving, I executed a calculated revenge by scanning the key statements and emailing them anonymously to the neighborhood book club Mom hosted monthly at the library, where busybody retirees dissected not just novels but local gossip. The foreword framed as a cautionary tale on family finances that would circulate faster than flu season, embarrassing them socially without direct accusation and forcing Dad to field awkward questions at his VFW meetings. As we drove back to Lisa's under skies now dumping steady rain that blurred the windshield wipers' rhythm, the kids dozing from the day's excitement, a sense of vindication mingled with unease, the partial truths unearthed leaving more shadows than light, especially when Lisa shared over dinner a hushed anecdote from cousin Beth about a sealed letter from our childhood home mentioning a hidden clause in Grandpa's will tied to Mike's special circumstances. A bombshell hinting at secrets from my early years that could upend everything and tempt me toward involving lawyers or even authorities if the favoritism masked something criminal, leaving me to stare at the rain-streaked window wondering whether to pursue the full unraveling or protect what remained of our peace at the cost of eternal what-ifs. The whisper of that sealed letter from Cousin Beth echoed through my thoughts like a persistent alarm clock during a much-needed weekend lie-in, igniting a determination that propelled me out of bed the next morning with the kids still snoring softly in Lisa's guest room where sunlight slanted through blinds patterned with faint dust, motes dancing in the beams. And after brewing a pot of strong coffee that chased away the remnants of yesterday's rain-soaked drive, I dialed Uncle Ray at his law office downtown where the hum of printers and phone rings formed the backdrop to his no-nonsense consultations for folks navigating everything from divorces to estate squabbles in this blue-collar corner of Ohio. Ray, with his gravelly voice shaped by decades arguing cases in courthouses that smelled of polished wood and old coffee, confirmed over the line the rumor about Grandpa's will clause during what he called a quick lunch break sandwiched between client meetings, explaining how the outdated provision from the 90s favored Mike as the primary male heir in a patriarchal setup that grated against modern sensibilities, much like the outdated dress code at my insurance firm that still mandated pantyhose for women. But he offered his support without hesitation, suggesting we contest it through probate channels that could redistribute assets fairly if I gathered the right documentation. His encouragement bolstering me like the first paycheck after a promotion that validated years of overlooked effort. Returning to the office that afternoon after arranging a half-day with my understanding supervisor, who knew family drama when she saw the shadows under my eyes, I confided in Karen during our usual lunch at the break room vending machine stocked with stale chips and sodas that cost more than they should. Her role as a fellow single mom of 3 teens, making her the perfect sounding board with stories of her own in-law battles that involved surprise backyard weddings and uninvited holiday crashes, and together we brainstormed over turkey sandwiches on wheat bread how to push back subtly her idea of organizing a family support bake sale, using Mom's cherished recipes to fund a proper storage unit for the kids' belongings striking me as brilliantly ironic, turning their homemaking legacy into a tool for my independence while injecting a touch of humor into the revenge by envisioning Mom's face upon learning her pie crust technique benefited my cause rather than Mike's endless needs. The plan took shape quickly as I texted Beth for more details on the letter, her response arriving with attachments of scanned pages hinting at conditions tied to Mike's behavior that could void the favoritism if proven irresponsible. And with Ray's guidance on next steps like filing a formal inquiry, alliances began forming organically when Beth invited us to her farm on the rural outskirts where cornfields stretched golden under harvest skies, promising a weekend escape with space for the kids to run free amid chickens and a tire swing that evoked simpler family times before resentments calcified. Mike's demanded meeting materialized 2 days later at a neutral park on the edge of town where picnic tables overlooked a pond dotted with ducks quacking for handouts from passersby, his family in tow with Tara pushing the stroller laden with diapers and snacks, while the toddler toddled unsteadily on the gravel path, and as we sat under a canopy of oaks shedding leaves like confetti from a reluctant party, Mike launched into accusations about my meddling with the financial leaks that had ants whispering at Bridge Club, his salesman's charm cracking into defensiveness, as he claimed I was driven by jealousy over his fresh opportunities after the pandemic upended his career, but I held my ground with the poise of boardroom negotiations, detailing how their room takeover disregarded the stability I'd clawed for post-divorce, including custody wins against Tom's sporadic involvement and the mortgage payments that kept a roof over our heads without bailouts. Emily and Jack played nearby on the swings, their swings creaking in rhythm with the tension, Emily's laughter mingling with Jack's shouts as he kicked a soccer ball toward the water's edge. A poignant reminder of the stakes that made Tara's weary nods more telling than Mike's bluster, and when he escalated with threats to leverage Dad's old connections at my firm for character references that could stall my next promotion. A low blow that ignited a flicker of the old sibling rivalry where he'd always played dirty, like hiding my homework to make me look unprepared. I countered with a measured revelation slipped to Tara in a sidebar about the loan discrepancies that might affect their family's future nest egg, planting doubts in her fatigued expression that could bloom into questions about the free ride she'd enabled unknowingly. Back at Lisa's that evening after the park standoff left the air charged like before a thunderstorm. Emily presented a drawing of our fractured family tree with branches wilting on one side, tugging at heartstrings woven from bedtime reassurances and school volunteer shifts, while Jack's probing questions about returning home forced a candid talk on redefining family beyond bloodlines tainted by bias, lessons I'd internalized from years of shouldering responsibilities, while Mike coasted on charisma. The counterstrike advanced with Karen's help in coordinating the bake sale at the community center where Lisa worked, tables laden with apple pies and brownies drawing neighbors who gossiped about local renovations gone awry, and in a prankish twist of revenge, I anonymously reported the unpermitted changes to my house's interior to the neighborhood association via their online portal, the resulting inspection notice arriving by certified mail that compelled Dad to dismantle the guest suite, hastily restoring echoes of the kids' original spaces without my direct involvement and satisfying that itch for payback served cool as a milkshake on a hot day. Yet dilemmas piled higher than the laundry baskets at Lisa's, work deadlines looming with a major audit report due that demanded late nights poring over data entries, while the kids' routines frayed at the edges from school transitions and missed practices, forcing me to grapple with whether torching these bridges served their long-term security or merely my pride, especially as Ray updated me on the clause contest requiring affidavits from relatives that could drag family into court like unwilling players in a bad sitcom. Alliances solidified further when an unexpected text from Tara arrived under the cover of night, proposing a private coffee meet to discuss options away from Mike's ears, her words laced with hesitation that hinted at cracks in their united front. But the true cliffhanger unfolded during a solitary drive home from the office through dimly lit streets where sodium lamps buzzed overhead, spotting Mike's SUV idling outside a dimly lit bar on the wrong side of town known for cheap drafts and shadier dealings, and as I slowed to a crawl, his voice carried on the open window arguing heatedly into his phone about keeping the secret from Sarah at all costs, the phrase freezing me in place with implications of buried truths from our shared past that could shatter the fragile progress I'd clawed toward, leaving me idling in the shadows, heart thundering over whether to confront him then or bide time for the alliance that might tip the scales irrevocably. That cryptic phone argument Mike had outside the bar fueled a relentless drive through the following days, where work blurred into strategy sessions with Uncle Ray at his cluttered office overlooking the Scioto River, where barges chugged lazily under bridges strung with holiday lights, even though Thanksgiving loomed like an uninvited guest in our fractured calendar, his guidance on contesting the will clause sharpening into a formal plan that involved affidavits from neutral parties and a review of estate documents buried in county records since Grandpa's passing 5 years earlier, when we'd scattered his ashes in the family plot amid eulogies that glossed over his rigid views on legacy. The unearthed emails Ray accessed through a subpoena-like request revealed Dad's fingerprints all over Mike's resume fabrications for sales jobs that promised stability but delivered dead ends, patterns of coaching that extended back to high school where Mike's transcripts got mysteriously altered to boost college apps while mine stood unembellished despite my perfect attendance and extracurriculars that filled pages in guidance counselor files. The betrayal stinging like salt in a wound reopened by every overlooked promotion at the insurance firm where merit should have trumped connections, but often didn't in this interconnected small-town network. Emily and Jack's emotional barometer shifted palpably during car rides to school where rain-slicked streets reflected taillights like shattered promises. Emily's hugs at drop-off lingering with questions about Grandma's sudden silence on their weekly calls that used to end with bedtime prayers, and Jack's baseball glove slapping against his thigh in the back seat as he mulled over team tryouts postponed by our upheaval, their vulnerabilities steeling me to secure a short-term rental in a nearby apartment complex advertised on community boards with amenities like a fenced playground and weekend barbecues that promised a semblance of roots. Amid the uncertainty, the lease signing feeling like a declaration of independence signed in the realtor's office, smelling of fresh carpet and possibility. With Karen's logistical wizardry handling the move logistics around her own brood schedules, we packed the essentials into rented boxes during a crisp weekend where leaves crunched underfoot like brittle apologies. The kids' excitement bubbling over bunk bed assignments and proximity to the public library stocked with adventure series that mirrored our own quest for stability. Though doubts nagged at the edges about whether this displacement taught resilience or resentment in their young hearts, a dilemma that made me second-guess the sharp edges of my resolve even as it empowered the path forward. The climax erupted at a mandated family summit in Dad's garage where fluorescent bulbs hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on workbenches littered with half-repaired gadgets and oil stains from projects abandoned midstream, the air heavy with the tang of motor oil and unresolved grudges as Mom fidgeted with a dish rag while Mike paced like a caged animal fresh from his bar escapades, Tara hovering on the periphery with the baby fussing in a carrier that swayed gently, laying out the timeline of financial webs on a folding table borrowed from the VFW hall, complete with Ray's notarized affidavit and printed email chains that trace the favoritism from childhood, allowances skewed in Mike's favor to recent wire transfers that could have funded Emily's entire elementary education. I articulated with the clarity of a closing argument how this systemic tilt not only depleted shared resources, but corroded the trust foundational to any family enduring economic squeezes like the recessions that hit Ohio hard in the aughts, injecting a dash of humor by quipping that if they fancied themselves innkeepers, perhaps they should have consulted the Yelp reviews before redecorating uninvited. The line drawing a reluctant snort from Lisa, who stood sentinel by the door. Mom crumbled first under the barrage, her voice breaking as she confessed the guilt gnawing since Dad's affair surfaced during their brief separation when Mike internalized the chaos as his fault, leading to rebellious streaks they overcompensated for with leniency. A raw admission that humanized her complicity while twisting the narrative of my overlooked steadiness into a poignant ache, Dad muttering concessions about initiating repayments from his pension draw that arrived predictably unlike Mike's erratic paychecks. Mike detonated then, his accusations flying like sparks from a faulty welder about my sabotage ruining his shot at a real estate flip in Pittsburgh that promised to end the cycle. But Tara intervened with a hushed pull aside, her whisper laced with the seeds I'd planted earlier about financial transparency, her eyes reflecting a dawning reevaluation that fractured their facade further as he stormed toward the door, vowing countermeasures through whatever shadowy networks he tapped at that bar. Revenge layered in satisfying strata, beginning with redirecting the bake sale proceeds from the community center event where neighbors snapped up lemon bars and chocolate chip cookies faster than Black Friday deals, funneling the $2,000 raised into a dedicated college savings account for the kids that earned nods of approval from aunts at the checkout line who praised the savvy twist on family support, followed by an anonymous submission of the loan records to a financial advisory newsletter circulated among retirees at Dad's golf league, the exposure cramping Mike's credit just enough to halt his latest scheme without inviting lawsuits and serving as a witty echo of the public call-out at dinner. We transitioned to the apartment under the cover of a moving truck that rumbled through quiet streets at dusk, the kids claiming territories with posters of superheroes and shelves for books that rebuilt their worlds brick by imaginative brick, the space filling with the scent of takeout pizza celebrating the fresh start even as boxes lingered unpacked like lingering doubts. Yet in the quiet of the first night, with the hum of the fridge providing white noise against uncertainties, a letter from Grandpa's estate lawyer arrived, forwarded to the new address, its contents alluding to an unclaimed asset. A modest investment fund tied to both siblings with conditions ambiguous enough to hinge on demonstrated responsibility, potentially voiding Mike's edge if his secrets like the bar dealings or forged paths proved disqualifying, the phrasing leaving room for interpretation that could invite reconciliation or deepen divides. Curled on the couch with Emily's head on my shoulder and Jack sketching nearby under the lamp's warm glow, I savored the empowerment of reclaimed agency, yet felt the isolation of severed threads weaving through family tapestries, pondering whether Mike's true intentions Masked desperation or malice, and if forgiveness might mend the fractures or merely paper over fault lines waiting to shift, the ambiguity hanging like mist over the Olentangy River at dawn, provoking endless reflections on the costs of loyalty in a world where blood ties bend but rarely break cleanly.